Our panel tonight, Minister in the new Department of Science, Innovation and Tech, which has responsibility, amongst other things, for artificial intelligence, is George Freeman. The MP for Mid-Norfolk is also creator of the Big Tent Ideas Festival, which encourages young people to engage with politics. From Labour, Jess Phillips. The Birmingham MP is Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence and Safeguarding. In 2020, she resigned early in her campaign to become Labour leader and has managed to write 3 books in 4 years about her life, politics and power. Jack Munro writes and talks about cooking on a tight budget and is also an anti-poverty campaigner. It all started with a blog, which came to be called Cooking on a Bootstrap. Many popular books, columns and media appearances have since followed, largely focusing on austerity recipes and poverty issues. And Chris Patten was the last governor of Hong Kong before it was transferred to China in 1997. In a rich and varied career, he became an MP in 1979, served in the Thatcher and Major governments, reformed policing in Northern Ireland, was an EU commissioner, chaired the BBC Trust, advised the Pope, is a life peer, I'll take breath in a moment, and has been Chancellor of Oxford University for the past 20 years. Good evening from Leicester. Before I go any further, I should say that we were due to be joined by Nimco Ali, a former advisor in the Home Office. She's also advocates for women in Africa, which is where she is stuck right now because she's in Ethiopia and was due to get a flight over here and it's been cancelled. So she can't be here tonight. We're very much hoping, of course, that we'll get her on another programme. So, welcome to the panel that we've got. Very pleased to see you. Welcome to our audience here in Leicester, and of course, welcome to you at home. We're on social media as always, and you can also listen to Question Time on BBC Sounds on a podcast after the programme. Hit subscription if you want to continue listening. But let's take our first question, shall we? Which is from Richard Osborne.
Should private WhatsApp messages be immune from public scrutiny? And who should decide? The government or the COVID inquiry?
So, Richard, I'm assuming you're referring to something that has just happened today, which is that the government has decided to go to court against the COVID inquiry because it wants the court to decide whether documents should be handed over, in particular WhatsApp messages and diaries belonging to Boris Johnson. The inquiry wants them, the government doesn't want to hand them over. George, do you agree with that decision not to hand them over, to go to court?
Can I answer Richard's question and then I'll take yours? He asked too, what do I think about the privacy of WhatsApp messages and should the inquiry decide? Look, I think they're good questions. WhatsApp messages have become a sort of fundamental part of certainly politics. My children tell me nobody under 25 uses WhatsApp. It's a very kind of adult platform. They do other platforms. But WhatsApps have become the absolute mainstream of conversation and discourse in politics, but not the official channel of government. And as a minister, the first thing you're reminded as you take office is that all official business has to go through official email channels, your private office, the box, official papers. So WhatsApp is the medium through which Jess and I might message each other and she'll say, look, we've got a bill coming up, could you give it an easy time? It's a good thing to do. And we're talking, it's conversation. So on the one hand, I think you've got to have a situation where parliamentarians, ministers can talk in private and exchange, and it's the oil of good democracy. It has been since the day of Cicero. But of course, the minute you write it down, it is in writing, and I think the best advice is probably if you don't want it ever to be subpoenaed or taken out of context, don't write it down. But everyone's rushing around 24/7 messaging each other. So I think the idea that ministers, people in government, advisors should be able to have private conversations is really important. But when you've got something as serious as the COVID inquiry, let's not forget, looking at a situation, a terrible tragedy worldwide in which 120,000 people died, it is vital that we get to the bottom of exactly what happened. Not so we can have some witch hunt, of course mistakes were made, but so we can learn the right lessons. And it's for that reason the government has set up the inquiry, appointed Baroness Hallett, who's a very distinguished judge, and given over, I think I checked this morning, it's 55,000 documents, 24 personal witness statements, 8 corporate statements.
OK, but should it hand over these documents?
So the
That's
the reason we've challenged this is that everything relating to COVID, we've said should be handed over. But these, it's a Section 2021 order which says everything. And we're just testing the case about should that include everything, including non-COVID? Should private discussions about people's childcare arrangements, their family, their loves life, should all of this be handed over? So it's a point of law. It'll be resolved, I think, pretty quickly. There'll be a judicial review and the court will decide. But that's the reason for it. We're actively cooperating.
The judge who's on the
privacy.
the judge who's on the inquiry set up by the government who appointed this judge is saying it's up to her to decide what's relevant. And, for example, if it shows that ministers are spending a lot of time talking about other things when perhaps they should have been spending more time talking about COVID, that is relevant to her.
Yes. It's now sub judice and I can't really comment on it. But
come on, George. Do you agree with the government? You agree with the government?
I'm answering your question. I have to be careful, but I would tell you that I would be very surprised if a court doesn't take that view.
Do you privately take that view, George? I'm kind of getting the feeling that maybe you do.
I think people's privacy is really important. I would like to see a situation where the inquiry say, listen, we will wholly respect the privacy of anything that's not related to COVID, we'll redact it, and give an undertaking to that effect. But we're dealing with 120,000 people dying. It's pretty important we get to the bottom of what
more than that worldwide, obviously. Chris Patten, as a former Conservative Cabinet Minister, do you agree?
No, I mean, it's perfectly clear that the law says that it's for Baroness Hallett to decide whether or not things should be redacted.
Who is a judge in charge?
Who is a judge. And if you look at what Boris Johnson said when she was appointed, he obviously thinks she's a fantastically good judge, and we should trust her. And it is important for us to find out what happened at the beginning. There were all sorts of allegations at the time about the number of COBRA meetings, which the Prime Minister hadn't attended. There were all sorts of suggestions that during January and February of that year, we'd been flogging PPE equipment to the Chinese. Now, we criticise China now for the way it's tried to cover up where the coronavirus came from. It would be lamentable if we tried to cover up what was happening in this country. And to talk about WhatsApp and privacy, after Matt Hancock loaded tons of WhatsApp messages onto an author to write a book about him, I think it's pretty laughable. So I think the government have more than slightly cocked this up to be vulgar.
Well, a bit of vulgarity goes a long way on question time. Quite a few hands up. I'm just wondering where to start. Yes, the woman back there with the scarf.
George has said that he'd be surprised whether that decision is going to be overturned in a judicial review. So does it not yet again reflect a lack of integrity on behalf of the government to waste money by taking this to a judicial review when they know what the advice they've been given, the outcome is predictable? It's shameful.
I'll come back.
Man there in the white T-shirt.
It was very similar to that. We keep on being told by government that this is a government of honesty and integrity.
Which are the words of Rishi Sunak, of course, the current Prime Minister.
We were all locked down for months and months on end. The public deserve to know.
The woman here with the glasses.
Yeah, again, on the same lines, Rishi Sunak said, honesty, integrity. Where is the honesty and integrity? It's not for them to decide. It should be the COVID inquiry that decides. We've been lied to enough by the government. We need more honesty.
Jess.
I want to make a point about some of what George said and actually what the government have said in response to saying why they're going to hold a judicial review, and that is about privacy and things not being relevant. Well, this morning I spent the morning with a rape victim who will appear in court on Monday, and she didn't get to choose what from her phone was taken off in the digital strip search that the government are completely comfortable with happening to every single rape victim in our country. This week I also received a letter from the Secretary of State for Justice because I asked them, the government, to intervene in cases of domestic abuse in the family court. And he came back to me and he said, it's up to the judges to decide what is admissible in court. So I'm afraid to say this judicial review is one rule for them, one rule for the rest of us. Once again, of course they should give it over. That I would be more than happy for people to look at my WhatsApp messages that are relating to anything, frankly, including work. And some of it would be embarrassing. I imagine Lady Hallett probably wouldn't include the thing with my husband and me asking him to get loo roll. I imagine that won't end up in the inquiry. Of course, she should be able to say, because you know, what is maddening about this is in many other countries around the world, they have finished their COVID inquiries. They have already done the work of learning the lessons. Yep. We can't even get ours off the ground without the government taking to court the person they've put in charge of it. It's a shambles.
I mean, I just want to come in and say that the bones of the COVID inquiry are to investigate potential dishonesty and potential criminal behaviour, and in no other circumstances would the people on the other end of those allegations be allowed to pick and choose what evidence they serve up to the judge. Enough people have paid the high enough price with their lives for the decisions and the behaviour of our government during the coronavirus crisis. And those people and their families and we, the public, deserve the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. For Rishi Sunak to say that it's a government of honesty and integrity is absolutely laughable when it's a government that routinely seeks to obfuscate, delay and deny their involvement in absolutely any wrongdoing. And I think they're hoping that maybe if they just kick the can far enough down the road, it might go away. But I hope that the right thing is done in this circumstance because people deserve it.
Okay.
I think there is a real issue about the advice that civil servants give to ministers, which it's reasonable to protect. But if that's how you're conducting, if how you're conducting government is to do it on WhatsApp, then no holds barred. It's a crazy way of performing in government.
George, given what you're hearing from the audience and from the panel here, and from what you said just now, it sounds like you think you probably won't win this action in court. And I'm wondering, do you think you'll even win it in the court of public opinion?
Well, no, to be clear, and I sympathise with the points that were made. I wasn't, as you know, I was making very clear this is a really serious inquiry. There are vital lessons to be learned. I take issue with I know there's an assumption, perhaps, Jack, and in the room, that it's just a whole bunch of criminals waiting to be caught. I don't think that. I think there were some really important lessons about, actually big lessons about the centralisation of the NHS, data, a whole lot of lessons about epidemiology, about how you deal with all this, as well as...
And what about Jess's point about people
yes,
don't have the right to say, well, you can have this...
I was going through them. I completely agree that, in the end, this is a judicial decision. It'll be taken by the courts, and I happen to think the courts will probably take the view that Baroness Hallett, who's running the inquiry, is perfectly entitled and empowered to decide what evidence she wants.
So to that woman's point, are you wasting public money by
going
to court in the first
and I
place?
wanted to answer that point, that I don't think it is a cynical waste of time at all. The privacy point is relevant. I think it'll clear up and give people confidence, even if all this achieves is to make very clear that the inquiry will treat with absolute confidentiality anything private, and we can get on with it. But I think it is really important that the rules of this are made clear, and I absolutely have very little doubt that the courts will find that Baroness Hallett will decide what evidence she deems relevant, and then we can get on with it.
So the government's, just to be clear, you're saying the government's going to court, but it thinks it's going to lose?
No, it's going to court to test.
But you think you're going to lose?
No, I'm saying, I think personally, it's quite likely that the courts will rule that Baroness Hallett will decide what evidence, but I think it's a point worth testing.
All right, I'm going to take a few more points from the audience before I move on. Yes, the person at the back there, and the man with the glasses on, yes. Yes, you, sir.
On the privacy point, is that not a reason to have two separate phones or two separate systems for communicating? One for the business side of things, those conversations that you're having with Jess, and another one for the private life that's going on that doesn't need to be seen by a COVID inquiry or future inquiries.
OK, and the man a little bit further forward in the dark jacket, yes.
Yeah, I agree with you, Fiona. It's the decision of the court versus decision of the public. And even coming to question time, all our Facebook, Twitter, everything account was checked before coming as an audience. So if it is the rule for the public... Bit of
background checking on you all, yes.
It's the BBC,
I think for the government, the
all.
rules should be the same, I think, yeah. That's what my view is. Thank you.
OK. And the man next to you, just put your hand up. Let's hear from you.
Thank you. While we debate and spend airtime talking about this, are we potentially missing the point and failing the future? Is that actually most of us, if we've learned from what it is get the outcomes out there. What can we learn to prevent us being in this situation again? And I guess everyone's nodding, but you're wasting the time debating little minutiae here is whatever helps the inquiry, just get on with it so we can protect the future.
Well, OK, thank you. OK. I'm going to take another question. Before I do, I just want to let you know where we are next week. Next week, we are in Kings Lynn in Norfolk. It was a lovely place. The following week, Question Time is in Deeside on the Welsh-English border. Also lovely. So if you'd like to come to those, or indeed any of our shows between now and our summer break in early July, you can just go to the Question Time website. Here's the address, and you can see all the details of how to apply. So, next question, please, from Lee Culver.
Good evening. As a single, full-time working parent, get the end of the month, no fun money anymore. When do you think I can expect to feel better off financially?
Well, I'm sure you're not the only person asking that question, Lee. Jack?
Oh, I mean, we've been hearing a lot over the last year and a half now about the cost of living crisis, as though it's fallen out of a clear blue sky. And it's not a cost of living crisis, let's be absolutely clear, although it is for everybody at the sharp end of it, and that's millions and millions of people. It's a cost of Conservatives crisis. It's a cost of austerity crisis. It's the cost of 13 years of pulverising all social support and all of those safety nets that we used to have in place that propped up the fundamentals of a decent society. It's the cost of stripping out the NHS and social care and refuges and welfare and all the support that many, many people and voters might have thought they never would have needed. They didn't think that they were going to ever be one of those people who would have to dip into those pots. And now that it's affecting sort of the chattering classes, the middle classes, the media classes, it's been given a fancy title, the cost of living crisis, and it's affecting almost everybody. To absolutely not answer your question, I'm afraid, I don't know where this ends or when this ends. I've been working with food banks and with people in poverty for the last 10 years. I've never known anything like the sheer scale of desperation and crisis that we're facing at the moment as a country. And the only thing that is going to change it is investment back into all of those services that have been stripped away and making sure that when people find themselves in a desperate situation, that there's some help and some support out there for them. And I hope for your sake and everybody else's sake that that happens yesterday, but certainly sooner rather than later.
And Jack, can I ask you, one suggestion from the government is possibly a voluntary agreement with the supermarkets to cap the prices of some goods. Do you think that will make much difference?
Again, it's one of those short-term solutions that will help people out for 5 minutes, like the money for the energy fund or the £20 uplift for universal credit that was then taken away. But what the government need to do is they need to invest in wages and they need to invest in social care and support and they need to invest in benefits, because capping the price of milk will help people this week, but it just means that supermarkets will push up the prices of other essential products that might not have made the shortlist, so your overall shopping bill won't come down anyway. I mean, I've campaigned to keep supermarket prices at a budget level myself over the last couple of years because of the cost of living crisis, but it's not a long-term solution. The onus shouldn't be on supermarkets to drive their prices down to poverty wages. The onus should be on employers and on the government to ensure that everyone's got a decent basic living standard.
OK. So, George, Lee is asking, when can he expect to feel financially better off again?
Well, the answer is within a few months, and I'll explain that. But I'll just take the first point. It is a very real crisis, and that's why the government's taking it so seriously. We've put in place a £94 billion package, cost of living relief. That's worth £3,500 to the average household. That is not a small measure. It is a huge and significant measure, and we've taken it because we understand and feel and share. In fact, it is just about everybody in this country is feeling it, but of course those on lower incomes are feeling it hardest, and that's why we've done what I think is the right thing. But I reject, I'll come to when exactly and why, but I reject the notion it's a cost of conservatism. I know it suits Jack and Jess may have a bite at the same point, but it's not just that, because it's going on across the whole of Western Europe. It's going on across the world, actually, and it's been caused by a whole series of things. The pandemic, it was the biggest economic shutdown for 300 years. And shutting the economy and firing it up does not happen without huge damage to the economy. The cost of the Ukraine war, not just the physical cost of it, but Putin turning off the gas taps to trigger a Western European gas recession. So these are things that are very real. They're nothing to do with conservatism. They're going on all across Europe.
But inflation is going down faster in Europe than it is in the UK.
It is. So we have a problem in this. We have one or two really serious problems. Food inflation, particularly, is stubborn in this country, and there's a whole raft of reasons for that, and we're trying to get to the bottom of how we can try and ease that pressure. In the end, what you have to do is get inflation out of the economy. It's boring, but if you don't get rid of inflation, you will keep on chucking more and more money at the problem. Money will get less valuable. We've been there back in the 70s.
So the IMF and the Bank of England say inflation won't reach 2%, which is the Bank of England target, until the middle of 2025. Others are saying until 2026. Is that how long Leah's going to have to wait?
No, it's not, and I'll explain why. So the good news is the OBR have just said we're not on target to go into recession this year, which was forecast. We're doing better than expected. Last 2 years, we've had the highest growth in the G7. This year, we're forecast to come out and get into growth later this year. On energy bills, the forecast is, to your point, that because of our energy relief and the energy price cap, bills will start to fall from late June, and you'll see £430 in your pocket over the next 6 months. So there's a very real relief is coming. But I'm not going to suggest that life is suddenly going to be rosy. What we have to do is get the economy growing, get people back to work, and make sure we drive inflation out of this economy. It's not glamorous stuff, but if inflation continues to roar, everyone's pound gets less valuable in your pocket.
Lee,
we have to get rid of inflation.
You're shaking your head at some of that, quite a lot of that, actually. What did you think of what you heard?
The next 6 months, I'm not going to use a lot of gas and electricity. It's summer. Yeah. It was great getting help over the winter, which is when prices were actually lower. I'm using the same amount daily as I am in the winter now. Things like council tax take 10% of my income. That's a big chunk for a single parent. Is that something we can look at reviewing?
Yeah, the best thing you can do on council tax actually is vote Conservative. Conservative council taxes are lower all around the country.
How's that
and it's
gone
a
for you?
major tax that hits
How's that gone for the last 13 years?
Jess?
I mean, the truth is, I really hate to say this, Lee. I wish I could say it was yesterday that you were going to get better off. But this isn't going to get better overnight. We need to grow our economy, improve our wages in our country, and mean that we can then spend the money on public services that Jack was talking about.
So if Labour wins the election, possibly as soon as next year...
Yeah.
And you're talking to Lee, how soon under a Labour government could you expect things to get better?
Well, I mean, there would be a couple of things. How old are your children, Lee?
Just turned 11 and nearly 8.
So one of the first things that Labour would do, literally on the first day of a Labour government, is give free breakfast club childcare, for example, for every primary school child. So that would potentially be a saving. But I recognise, you know, I've lived on benefits and had 2 children myself. And I was lucky enough to do it under a Labour government, and so I was pretty well looked after, actually. But the reality is that we have to have a plan, a proper growth plan for our economy that actually brings good jobs, good wages, brings about the change that when George says, oh, we're not going into recession, oh, get out a ticker tape parade. Does anybody feel like there's massive growth in our economy at the moment? Can you feel it? Until people in my constituency feel like it's actually reaching them, I'm not going to wave a little flag and say, well done, Rishi Sunak. The reality is, and the Labour Party has a green industrial plan that has been said by many, many different captains of industry to be the only people on the pitch with regard to growth at the moment, growth in house building. We just need to laser focus on having sustained growth in our country. So then you feel it, not just 400 quid one year, you feel 400 quid every year, every month. Okay. That's when it's going to change.
Man here in the front.
I think it's wholly lamentable that a G7 country finds itself in a situation where normally law-abiding citizens are resorting to shoplifting baby formula in this day and age. And also, I think it's time that we actually accepted that the levelling up agenda is not working, hasn't worked, and those funds are probably better directed to helping the people that need it now. I think on the price cap for the shops, that's a very blunt tool. The very upper classes and the middle classes are going to benefit. It's not targeted enough at the people that really need it. So less blunt tools, more targeted support for the people that need it. And it isn't a cost of living crisis, it's a cost of existing crisis for the average person on the street.
Okay. And the woman behind you in the stripy top.
Going back to the energy payments, which were fantastic, but do you think that a lot of people received it that didn't really need it?
Well, it was across the board, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So inevitably that will be the case that some people who could afford to pay for it.
Yeah, some people got it.
Got the money anyway.
Didn't really need it.
The man there in the blue jacket and shirt.
So why is it the government always find the reason to blame everyone else and get everyone else to look for a resolution? They've got all this money to find for these pointless legal battles, so why don't they throw that into solving the real problems?
Chris Patton.
Just said the truth is, and the truth is that our political establishment is very reluctant to tell electors, to tell the great majority of people who are in the middle ground in British society what the truth is. And the truth is we're in one hell of a mess.
Yeah.
Our GDP per capita now is less than not only France, Germany, the Netherlands, it's lower than Ireland. It's lower, for heaven's sake, than Lithuania. The poorest 20% in Britain are poorer than the poorest 20% in Poland. That is not the sign of a community, of a country which has things going for it. I don't know if any of you listen to the Today programme. It's the way I wake up every day. And I listened to Larry Summers, the former American Treasury Secretary, this morning, talking about the world and talking about Britain. And he was arguing that Britain is in a much worse position than others. They were all facing a really difficult international situation. Why are we in a worse situation? First of all, because of inflation, and inflation is partly a result of spending a great deal of money which was necessary in order to deal with energy prices, and I think Rishi Sunak did that extremely well in the furlough scheme. It's also because of a lax monetary policy by the Bank of England. But it's also, and this is a word one isn't supposed to use anymore, it's also because of Brexit. It's because of what Brexit did to the value of the pound. It's because of what Brexit has done to make it more difficult for us to import goods and for us to import labour. And importing food now is costing us, according to the LSE, £7 billion more a year because we're outside the European Union. And until we start facing up to the realities of our life, to the fact that we can't possibly spend money on all the things we want, increase public spending and cut taxes. It's absolutely impossible. You can't do all those things. And I just wish, I think Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are decent human beings. I just wish they would fess up to the fact that we have to tell people what they're going to have to expect in the next few years, because I think it's going to be very tough to get out of the hole that we're in.
Chris, you sound very disappointed with this government, which is interesting given that you are a former and very prominent former Conservative cabinet minister. Well, and I mentioned the next election to Jess. Yeah, well, do you think the Conservative government will win the next election? Do you think they deserve to win the next election?
Well, you referred to the fact that I'd been in the past the chairman of the Conservative Party. I was the chairman of the Conservative Party when there was one. I'm still a Conservative, and I'm a Conservative for the same sort of reasons that Michael Heseltine is a Conservative, or Ken Clarke. I don't find I have very much in common with, for example, some of the flat earthers on the right of the Conservative Party, any more than Jess would have had any much sympathy for Jeremy Corbyn, about whom she was extremely brave in the past. I really do think that we want, if we're going to get out of this mess, to be honest about the issues that face us and get out of the ideological bolt holes, and also stop thinking that policy is about getting headlines in the tabloid papers. Policy is more serious than that.
OK, so do you think the Conservatives could do with the time a spell in opposition?
Having avoided spells in opposition in the past when people said it'd be really good for you, and I thought, I remembered what it was like in opposition. Boom! Terrible. As Jess would, it's really awful. What I hope is that the next election is fought between the two big parties on the basis of telling people the truth about the state of our economy and what needs to be done. And I think that goes for housing policy, it goes for the health service, it goes for dealing with the elderly. We actually have to be honest, and there are occasions when the two big parties should work together. Why don't we work together on issues like the care of the elderly and the Dilnot report and so many other things? We should actually work together on a number of issues instead of scoring points off one another.
I agree. So, George, I better let you respond to something there. So, I heard you saying hear, hear to some of what Chris Patten said. I didn't hear you saying hear, hear to when he said I was a member of the Conservative Party when there was one. What do you make of that?
Well, everyone always says that. He's earned the right
I'm not sure they
to
do.
be able to... He's earned the right to be able to say it. Look, I agree with much of what Chris said, and I've always been a huge admirer and fan of his. And the only thing I would add is if we're going to be honest, which I would love us to be, and talk about cross-party, I set up the Big Tent Festival, and Jess has been, and Nimco, who would have been here, has been. We do need a much more mature debate. I think the young and others in this country want the truth. They want to know and have a proper debate, and they're ready for it. And I think we're in a situation where successive parties have been trying to promise jam tomorrow, and actually people want to know what is the mess today properly. So I buy that. The only thing is, I think you need to add to that list a problem of ever-increasing expenditure on the NHS, for example. Since I've been in Parliament 13 years, it's gone up a third. It's gone from 30-odd% of public spending to 40-something odd. You're not seeing a third increase in output on the ground, in your GP, in your dental practice. Where's it all going? I'm not blaming anyone in the NHS. I'm just saying we also have a problem of inefficient, unmodernised public services, which I'd add to the list that Chris set out. And on Brexit, for what it's worth, look, I voted Remain because I felt that there would always be a short-term cost. And if you do it, you have to deliver a medium and long-term gain. And I think we're now in that very difficult bit where the costs are obvious.
So you agree with Chris that it is costing...
I think
it's that we are paying the cost of Brexit in our food bills?
I think it has had some costs. But I also think there are some real advantages. And when Jess talks about creating a new economy, I'm not taking any lectures from anyone on that. I've had a whole career, 15 years of venture capital, building new businesses. We've set up a new department. We're growing the industries of tomorrow here.
All right.
And regulatory freedom, whether it's in autonomous vehicles or in AI or in agri-tech or in medicine, drug discovery, those regulatory freedoms are hugely valuable to attract money. So it's not as simple as Tories bad, Labour good, spending, all spending good. We have to have a proper debate about how we take your money and invest it better for tomorrow's public services and economy.
OK, I'm going to move on from this subject and take another question, which a lot of you have asked about. I wasn't sure it would come up this week, but it has. Steve Churton.
Yes, thank you. Should the UK follow the lead of Australia and ban all vapes unless they are prescribed by a medical professional?
Yes.
Right. OK, so sort of meanly, because normally what goes on in the green room stays in the green room. Jess. But you were vaping, so I'm going to come to you first. What is Labour's policy on vaping? I made you blush now.
Yeah, no. I in the spirit of honesty, I am a vapor. I'm on Chris Whitty's good list there because I vape because I gave up smoking. I smoked as a child and I smoked for many, many, many years, and now I vape instead of smoking. And it's the only thing...
Do you vape in the House of Commons?
No.
Hang on. I thought I just lobbed that in there.
Yeah, yes, sometimes. Not in the chamber. The Speaker wouldn't allow for that. Look, Labour's view on this is that, it is definitely a benefit for helping people give up smoking, and that has been, I think, proven. But there is lots of concerns, and in fact, in one of the health bills recently, the Labour Party put forward a measure to ban the marketing to children of children's flavours and children's colours on vapes, and the Conservatives did vote against that. And now it's very good to hear that Rishi Sunak wants to have a look at that now. But that would be our view, is we definitely need to have a look at this. And I've got two sons, and lots of their friends vape, to be perfectly honest. And it is definitely because they are targeted. And teachers are saying things like that kids are leaving lessons to go to the toilet because they're needing to go and vape and things, which you would never have done with smoking, because you could have told, couldn't you? That
you could smell it.
You could smell it. So it's a real concern, and the point is to stop people being addicted to nicotine, not getting young people addicted to nicotine.
And do you think what Australia's doing, a ban, that's what the question about, do you think that's a step too far, or...?
A ban on vaping altogether?
Well, you can only vape in Australia if you get a prescription.
OK,
so
well, I would get a prescription, wouldn't I? Every time Wes Streeting talks about it, I'm like that, oh my gosh,
yeah, but you haven't smoked for 6 years, you might not get a prescription now.
I might not get a prescription now. Look, I think that we need to look at the children's element of this before we jump in with 2 feet about Australia, but time will come, I imagine.
Jack?
I mean, I'm a parent to a 13-year-old, and his friends, lots of his friends vape. I found a vape in his blazer. He won't like me saying that on BBC, but I had to have a conversation with him about it.
How old did you say he was?
13. I vape, but I don't vape those 20-milligram multicoloured bars in the glorious flavours that are marketed at children. I think the way to tackle this is the same way that retailers are tackled for selling alcohol to children. You never hear of it these days. You never hear of retailers being penalised because they've sold a bottle of vodka to a 12-year-old, because the penalties for that are so harsh and the procedures for that are so well regulated that it just doesn't happen. So I think a clampdown needs to start on where the kids are getting the vapes from in the first place, and putting the onus on retailers not to sell them to children in the first place. I think, you know, adults, which I count myself on most of the time, I can make a decision to ingest some nicotine behind the scenes here and there because it makes me a slightly nicer person. But my son and his friends don't have the emotional maturity to be able to make those decisions. We're trying to, as Jess said, get people to have less nicotine in their bodies and in their lives, not encourage them to pick it up as a habit if it's not a habit that they already had.
You know, Jack, we'd love you to come back on the programme. Now that you've just outed your son, I'm not sure your family will allow you. but anyway, yes, the man there in the glasses.
I'm 17 years old and I attend college, so in the toilets, every single day when I go in, there's people vaping and they miss the lessons. Instead of going to the lessons, they're seeing their mates chatting away and vaping, and I feel like it's not regulated enough because I'm on Snapchat, and everyone's Snapchat stories that I see every single day, there's people selling them and there's a black market and they make their money through that, and I feel like the government should do more.
OK. Chris?
I smoke the real stuff. And
unrepentantly.
I started when I was at school, and our lavatories must have smelled very differently to the ones in the grammar school here. I started when I was at school. I went on till I was in my late 30s and I gave up. I'm delighted I did, because in the last few months, 2 of my best friends have died because they smoked. I don't think I could have managed to give up smoking while doing some sort of intermediary step. I think I would have found it very difficult to go from cigarettes, and I used to smoke untipped, to vaping. I just thought when I did it, I just got to stop. I threw the last one. I shouldn't admit this, perhaps on environmental grounds, but I threw my last cigarette stub into the Grand Canal in Venice. That was the end of my smoking.
What a fantastically grand gesture!
I realised that for some people, vaping must be an intermediary step before they perhaps give up entirely, and it's plainly not as dangerous as smoking a cigarette. But the sensible thing to do, as far as young people are concerned, and I'm delighted the government have started to move on this, I think we should just ban the sale of vapes to under-18s.
Well, it is illegal to sell vapes to under-18s. Yeah. Well, what happens is children can yes, it's legal to market them, and children can buy them online, of course.
Well, sorry. Well, in that case,
illegally
cover online as well, because I don't see any reason why we shouldn't. It's not a great issue of civil liberty.
So the man there in the pattern top, yes.
Can't we just do what we did to cigarettes and put them in brown, horrible packaging with what can happen to you if you smoke them, especially to younger kids when they don't need it?
Trouble is,
yes, which is also what they're suggesting in Australia, to be kind of pharmaceutical packaging. You know, for those of you who don't vape, who not necessarily au fait with exactly what kind of things are out there, there's one brand, for example, that offers flavours like green gummy bear and Raz lemonade. So the government has just closed a loophole in the law that allows retailers to hand out free samples to children of vapes, even though the children can't legally buy them. So you've done that. But what about Jess's point that the Labour suggested an amendment to stop, what was it, to stop marketing vapes to children, and the government didn't want to go along with that? Why not?
Well, only because we are literally in the course of introducing that very clampdown that you've talked about, and we've...
What, the one I just mentioned?
A whole raft of things that I will list off, and we've set out a call for evidence for more things. No. What we want to do is get lots of ideas. We haven't said no to...
Do you need more evidence to stop the marketing of vapes to young children?
Yes. Only, let me just talk about why. So, at the moment, it is illegal to sell vapes to children, and So why is it going on? Well, we've raised the fines now up to £2,500 and a custodial sentence if somebody is found repeatedly selling. So we have to get tough on the people who are actually selling it. Secondly, we've got this appalling point of free samples that I think Jess mentioned. You know, you can't give children free samples of something and not claim that you're not inducing them to get onto nicotine. So we have to, we're clamping down on that. I think the health warnings is actually a very sensible possibility, and I know Chris Whitty feels very strongly that all nicotine products should come with an addiction warning, because the truth is, this story illustrates it, we need, as Chris Whitty has said, we need to help people who are addicted to nicotine-related tobacco, which is a killer, to get off it. And vaping does have an important utility for those people. But we do not want to get a new generation weaned onto nicotine-related products. And that is what is happening. So that's why...
When you close the loophole in terms of selling, of giving vapes to children, why did the government not stop marketing vapes to children at the same time?
Well, we've set up an illegal vapes unit to look at every single option, including
I don't
banning...
think you've answered that question.
All right. You asked me a question and then don't let me finish it. We've set up a unit to...
That's not to do with marketing.
We've announced the first three things. We've set up a unit to look at a whole raft of other measures, including, as I said earlier, marketing, including, as I said, clamping down on the distribution. How are these products getting to the corner shops? How are they getting into schools? So we've already banned the selling of them to children. It's enforcement, supply chains, advertising, marketing. And I think the point about schools is very well made. I'm not yet clear we should ban them in society for the reason we've talked about, but I think ban them in schools. I cannot imagine a good reason why we want children indulging in any addictive activity on any school campus. So there are a raft of things we've launched. I think the Prime Minister is right that we've allowed this to get out of hand for too long, and it needs that very clampdown that you talked about, which is why he's launched
All right, sorry.
Am I right in thinking that the BBC deserves a bit of credit for this? Because wasn't it a BBC investigation which discovered the amount of toxicity
well, there certainly was. Well, certainly Rishi Sunak did mention it as part of the reason he took the decision about handing out free samples. The BBC did an investigation, I think it was this week or last week.
Last week, yeah.
In a senior secondary school as a kind of example, and looked at the kind of illegal vapes that kids were buying online. They had extraordinarily high levels of lead, nickel and chromium. I mean, just scary high levels.
We've also got customs and the border people are looking at this as well, because if they're illegal to sell to children, then why are we importing? Why are we allowing them in?
I don't know. Why are you allowing
them? Well, we're not.
You're the government.
That's why we've launched the clampdown, and that's why we're looking, to your point about marketing, at making sure that goods that are coming in clearly targeted at children, we stop them coming in. It's about the supply chains as well as the sales point.
All right. I'm going to take another question. Forgive me, all those who've got your hand up. I'm going to try and get through quite a few. So, Sanj Patani, where... Oh, there you are.
Good evening. So is artificial intelligence the future or the Terminator?
Right. Very well put, Sanj, if I may say. So we had the heads of OpenAI and Google DeepMind adding their warnings this week to a whole series of warnings we've had. And they put out a statement saying that AI could lead to this, basically could lead to the extinction of humanity and should be treated as serious a risk globally as a pandemic and nuclear war. So, you're not the Minister for Artificial Intelligence, George, but that is in your department. Now, the government put out a white paper earlier, which now seems pretty out of date, given the conversations we're having about artificial intelligence.
No, I don't think it's out of date. I think it's timely. There is a really important conversation to have. And I think, Sanjay, you've asked the question on everyone's minds. I think we've all been quite struck by how quickly, in the last few weeks, a handful of leading AI scientists and engineers have just warned, have put a flag up and warned about the potential of this technology. And I think they're right to do so, because at its most acute, artificial intelligence has a means to generate its own capacity for thought and action. And it isn't genetics, but it has similar implications if you allow it to go unchecked. And I think the fact we're debating it tonight, the fact that we've set out a very important AI white paper, regulatory white paper, and we signalled loud and clear.
I thought that white paper ruled out any new laws or regulation.
No, it didn't. It set out...
What regulation did it suggest?
It set out the 5 principles on which we intend to regulate AI, and it made a really important point, which is my central point, that like so many technologies we've seen over well, the history of mankind, certainly in the last 100 years. Great apocalyptic warnings that they're going to destroy society and make everyone unemployed. My instinct and the government's instinct is that this needs proper regulation, and we should regulate not AI as some monster, but think about how we use it. So in my background career, we used very basic AI, and it's now used for drug discovery, and it shatters the time it takes to get to discover a drug. It'll drive through vast amounts of data. It'll help you discover new medicines. It's being used in climate change for tracking climate patterns. It's being used in a raft of really important ways. But that's very different from AI used, say, in the digital economy to create appalling sort of, revenge porn, visual characters that are distorting, and you can find yourself as a character in a game online. This is appalling abuse of this power. So that's why the Prime Minister's made very clear we need to regulate on the basis of its use.
And can I just ask you, given the warnings we've had, do you honestly feel confident as a government? I mean, all governments are going to be grappling with this, and it's not a party political thing necessarily, but do you feel confident as a government that this is something that governments can successfully tackle, given the grave nature of the warnings we're getting and how fast this stuff is moving?
Yes, I do. I've just got back from the G7 Science and Technology Ministers, and I raised it as something we felt very seriously, should be taken seriously by the international community, because your point, there's no point the UK on our own regulating if we're not going with the advanced economies. And that issue is one that we've all gripped, and all countries agree that it needs to be gripped properly, and there need to be some proper regulatory frameworks. But I think the UK has an opportunity here to move more quickly and to try and set out some clear rules in different applications. The EU is looking to regulate AI as one technology. We're going to take a different approach and regulate it by its application. And I think that will lead us getting to the point more quickly and harnessing the benefits of this technology, but making sure we're not exposing ourselves to the real dangers as well.
Jess?
So, it's my understanding, actually, that the government's white paper didn't suggest any legislation specific.
It didn't rule it out, which was the point I was...
Oh, so
I see. Well, that's rather different from suggesting regulation. It's just it's not ruling out regulation.
No, it's perfectly clear. You said it rules it out. It didn't.
No, I didn't. I said it didn't.
Well, it hasn't got any regulation in it. It hasn't suggested any regulation currently. And I think we've seen a number of Pandoras recently where we try and regulate after the fact. And, the Online Harms Bill, which still doesn't exist really in any sense and is being lagged behind, actually, the development of the internet, I think is really important. Look, I want to see AI, and I think that actually world and global leaders are really, and it was discussed, as George said, at the G7, the idea of really high-risk security threats of AI is something that is being thought about. What worries me is the sort of medium risk element and what we need to regulate, the kind of thing that will change everything, like the workplace, elections, things like that, the stuff that we actually interact with. We can leave to governments the worry about, the nuclear and etc. And I don't think that if the government don't harness what it's going to do with that alongside workers and change it with businesses and workers involved in how this change is going to happen, and just leaves it to big tech bros, and we all know that Rishi Sunak is never more comfortable than when he's wearing a hoodie with his tech bro pals. Like, if we just allow them to design it for them, we end up once again with massive tech giants ruling over our lives. And so actually I think that the white paper was out of date the second that it was written. And actually we do need regulation, and we need a government that is going to work to make sure that the AI works for us, the people, because it has so much potential, and we're all using it all the time at the moment. I think I'm picking that I want to watch Succession, but somebody's telling me, a robot is telling me that I want to watch it. And we're all using it all the time. We don't have to be so frightened of it, but I can feel it slipping away that we're going to get the benefit. The benefit's going to be decided by people with loads and loads of money, and actually we want to make sure that it's for all of us.
Man there in the bow tie.
Thank you. AI has a huge, important role to play in healthcare, as you alluded to. We use it. In my specialty, skin cancer management, we cut down the waiting time by 300 patients seen in 3 minutes and triage skin cancers, so also on breast cancer. What needs is definitely a regulation. It's same like genetic engineering. We regulate genetic engineering, therefore we don't create monster. When the AI gets more competent than human being, that's when it becomes a trouble. Therefore, it's important that we need to regulate it.
Man here in the blue jacket. Sorry, just here in the blue jacket.
Hi. While we recognise that AI has many, many benefits, which comes to your point, Jess, I can't help but feel that the government isn't delivering any timelines for when it will legislate.
All right, I'll come back to you, George, on that. Jack?
I mean, when I was a child and I watched, fantasy films about the rise of the robots, artificial intelligence, it was kind of sold to us that the robots and the artificial intelligence would be doing the minimum wage back-breaking work, like, moving the parcels around the warehouses and doing the cleaning jobs and freeing up human beings to make art and create and write music and recipes and essays and live full and creative and meaningful lives. And we seem to find ourselves in a situation where the AI is making the art and the songs and the recipes and the essays, and the human beings are working more and more minimum wage back-breaking work in order to fund it. And that just feels like it's entirely the wrong way round. And I don't know if that's something that can go back in its box, but when you've got schools who are holding art exhibitions of AI-produced work at a cost to their art students who've been working on their own portfolios for years, what message does that send those students and other human beings about our values and what we can contribute to society when it can all just be written off with something that's been junked up by a robot in 10 seconds flat? And that's not a world that I want to live in. I want the robots to be doing the back-breaking minimum wage work so that we have the freedom to make the art and make the songs and write the recipes and do the creative stuff. That's what we were told would happen.
The man there with the glasses, the green shirt, yes.
The government seems to be making the point that it wants to make sort of British regulations that are separate from European regulations. And does that not make it harder for British businesses to invent technologies and then market them in the EU? And does that not make it harder for sort of cross-border trade to occur? Surely it makes more sense to be working with other economies so that we can prosper together.
OK, and the man here.
Are you going to collect tax receipts if there's no humans to collect tax from?
Well, it might be quite nice to pay less tax, actually. I don't know. And the man there in the check shirt.
You mentioned music. Just sort of cast whether you're in fact old enough to remember the song in the year 2525, "If Man is Still Alive, Won't Need No Arms, No Legs." Is this the way AI? Is this the way AI is going? I actually, the person whose name's gone out of my head, who was credited with inventing the World Wide Web, said it was his worst day's work.
Tim Berners-Lee.
Tim Berners-Lee.
Yeah, he said it was his worst day's work. It's all got to be about controlling the use. Clearly there are benefits, but the risks to us all are enormous.
Chris Patton.
First of all, contrary to what Jess said, and the thing that really worries me is that it's actually the heads of these big tech firms who are asking to be regulated by government. They went to Congress and asked to be regulated. And that makes me slightly nervous. If they're bothered, what should I be? The point about Tim Berners-Lee is an extremely important one, because he was responsible more than anybody else for the internet. He's then seen over the last few years some of the consequences of that. In, for example, the distortion of identity politics, the use of the social media in such a hateful, spiteful, degrading way. And he now wonders whether it was a real benefit or not. With artificial intelligence, I'm told, I can barely make my laptop work, let alone. I'm told that the real...
Too busy smoking, Chris, that's what it is.
Chucking in the Grand Canal.
Yeah.
The real problem, which George will be able to tell us about, is artificial general intelligence, which is the point at which artificial intelligence doesn't need any human intervention. There's just one point which isn't as grand or awful as all that, saying, of course, we have to regulate, of course, we have to find ways in which we can regulate across borders. But artificial intelligence is already posing problems in schools and universities.
Yes.
And I'm really pleased that there's a group of head teachers, for example, who are looking at ways in which artificial intelligence can help teachers and help at primary schools, for example, do without rote learning and help kids in that sort of way. But it's a real challenge for educators, both at schools and in higher education. And I think we should help them deal with that. But I think there and in other ways, in medical research, as was suggested, it could be a great bonus. But this is something we don't really know what it is. We know we've got to control it.
Man here in the glasses.
If AI can do what humans can do, doesn't that make us redundant as humans if that can just do what we do?
They can't breed.
Yet.
Yeah, but we don't need.
And the man back there, yes. Yes, you, sir.
I think they were saying regarding the regulations, replying back to Chris, how some of the big tech bosses were saying it just to cut down on competition from any new companies trying to basically break into the market. What's your thoughts on that one?
Well, listen, let's George, let me bring you in here. I mean, I don't know if you want to answer that point, but also the man here, you talked about when is the government going to legislate, what's the timeline for that? And the point you made up there is, if you have different legislation compared to the EU, say, for example, or other countries, is that making it harder for UK tech companies?
Yeah, there's some really good points I'd like to take. Just on that one, the regulatory alignment point. Look, in the end, there's a global race for investment in AI, but there's also a global race to make sure we're secure in a world of AI, and it's a race. And I made that point at the G7. All the G7 economies accept that it's not in anyone's interest to allow one country to dominate or one company to dominate. So there's a race here, actually, for enlightened regulation, and I'm very confident, as we do with medical regulation, that we work very closely with the European regulators. We are highly regarded as a regulator, and I don't see any reason for that to change. In fact, I think we can be something of a test bed for regulation. Just on a couple of points, I think the elections point I think Jess made, I think is very concerning. It's clear that AI has started to be used in elections in ways that we don't yet fully understand, similarly in education. And I think the point the gentleman here made, you know, in the end, like a market, markets only work with values, with rules. You can't do anything in a market. They have to be properly regulated, as do technologies. And I think at its most fundamental, all of us, I think, agree that the AI revolution mustn't be at the expense of our shared humanity and the lived human experience of the child imagining, of fresh air, of all of that. And I actually think what we're seeing is a counter response. People saying, look, I want to harness it for good. I do not want it dominating my lives. And I think if ever there was a topic for some cross-party work in Parliament, Upper House and House of Commons, this is it. I have to say, just on the economy impact, I come from a rural agricultural area. I used to do back-breaking jobs, pulling weeds out of fields. Most of that is now done by machines. There are more jobs being created, actually, in cheese and gin and all the food processing. And in AI, actually, in agriculture, a very powerful tool for making sure you only apply water or crop protection where it's needed. So it has benign uses and is creating jobs, but it needs regulation. That's why we set out the principles, and we're in the process now of framing specific proposals in different fields.
And I'm afraid that is where we must end it. We are out of time. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much to all of you here in Leicester for coming along this evening. And, of course, as always, thank you to you at home for watching. From Question Time, for now, until next week, bye-bye.
That's a bit of a mad question time, wasn't it? Bit of a mad bunch of questions. Fuck the Tories. Just let's get that out the way. Taking off, whatever. Anyway, the inquiry, that should be a hoot. Nothing will get done. They'll all be out of power. No one will go to fucking jail or get a fine or anything. It's just a bunch of waffle. So fucking ignore that. The whole the AI thing's mad. We are fucked when it comes to AI. And they're gonna put it in the new Windows because Microsoft bought ChatGPT or whatever the fuck it's called. It's coming to Windows. Ugh. Do you notice anyone who's got a Snapchat? Fucking do one on there. AI bot on fucking your Snap, and you can't get rid of it. Why is there a bot on my phone? Why? What am I supposed to do? Fucking ask you questions? It's ridiculous. And the people who are doing it, it's mad. I don't even know, like, what's the point? Like, I can understand AI being used for, like, the weather, or, you know, some shit where you'd have to work things out and crunches numbers, or, you know, that kind of thing. But these chatbots are fucking creepy, because they can literally say mad shit. I remember Google did a chatbot talking to another chatbot, and they started talking in their own weird little language. Oh, what the fuck? They got their own little mad language going on, and they had to turn it off because they didn't know what the fuck it was talking about. They're like, oh, you better shut that down. Yeah, so I'm voting Terminator or some shit. It honestly feels, because I've been literally obsessing for about a year now, give or take, Warhammer 40k. Don't know why. I literally remember it when I was a kid, but I wasn't that interested. But I've been obsessing about it lately. It feels like we live in the Warhammer 40k universe. It literally does. Like some of the things that are just like, that's kind of funny. It's just took me this long to realise that there is an emperor of mankind sitting on a golden throne somewhere. That's who runs the planet, the Big E. And we're stuck with the fucking the Inquisition. Oh dearie me. I'm just waiting for the Tynid invasion. Just saying, the Nids are coming. Or whatever. Mad shit. Anyway, that's your lot. If you're thinking, where was all the politics live this week? There wasn't any. Literally wasn't. So, I think because it was the bank holiday, really. So, should be back next week, basically. And I will see you on Sunday for Laura Koonsberg. If I'm up, I'll play when it's on its normal time, 9 o'clock. But if not, then I'll play it in the afternoon or some shit when I get up. Depends how much fucking alcohol I consume. Have a good night, ladies and gents. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss shit. You don't need to hit the like. Yeah, that doesn't make any difference anyway. But subscribe if you want to actually know when I go live or whatever. And don't hit the bell because sometimes it just spams your phone, which I fucking hate. I never use the bell thing ever. I normally stream every day. Just come and check. You should normally see a stream. Anywho, good night. I'm going to go and play some Star Citizen and get a 30k. Hopefully not, but you never know. Anywho, good night.